we asked our good friend Julian Costley to catch up with him and Hermann and to share old times and think differently about the future. Julian, as a younger entrepreneur CEO, teamed with Hermann as his angel investor 20 years ago to found eTrade, an online trading platform in the UK at the start of that movement. The partnership was legendary. Both went on to be bought out in 2 to 3 years at £100 million plus pound valuation. This was taken earlier. New Zealand is 12 hours ahead on a London-Auckland call. Over to you, Julian.
And to Courtbick for arranging this fireside chat, and a special welcome and thanks to Hermann Hauser, who joins us from his home in New Zealand. Good evening, Hermann.
Good evening, Julian.
And if I may, there is a scene behind you there, which is, I think it might be worthy commenting on.
It's just my beach in New Zealand. I've got a farm in New Zealand because my wife is a New Zealander, and this happens to be my beach, which of course we're very keen on, and the kids grew up here, so we've got a very fond memories over the many years that we've come here.
Very good. Well, if nothing else, that's a motivation to all of the venture capitalists and entrepreneurs who are watching now, that's one of the spoils of enormous success. So I think there are many people who one would say Hermann Hauser needs no introduction, but I'm going to give an introduction anyway, because we do have a lot of young entrepreneurs who are watching, and unless they've done all their homework properly, they won't know the extraordinary career and influence that you've had on the market and on the investing market too. Of course, it goes back to Olivetti, to Acorn Computers, the BBC Micro, Arm Holdings, and I know you're a little upset about that going to foreign investors, but we won't touch back on that one. Famous Cambridge Network, and of course, extraordinary success with your venture capital company that you co-founded, Amadeus. And probably I didn't know actually until I looked it up, until I did my research on you as well, that you were granted a knighthood also in 2015. So enormous.
Yes, indeed. I'm very proud of that. As an Austrian, there are very few honorary knighthoods, and I managed to get one of them.
Brilliant. So in the next 20 minutes or so, obviously we want to touch on the impact of the pandemic, very much on the world of investing in technology and what is happening at the moment globally. And of course, because we do have young entrepreneurs in the audience, perhaps some insights into, as wearing your investor hat, what you've looked for over the years, and perhaps giving some advice to young entrepreneurs. But I'm going to take you back, if I may, more than 20 years, to a time that you and I worked together. We met in 1998, and I'm going to bring to your attention this book. And if you recall, I think it was within the first few minutes of us meeting in Cambridge that you handed it to me and gave me these apocryphal words, the world is going to change. Now that book was all about community.
Didn't I?
Well, do you want it back?
No. But then this wasn't a difficult thing to predict.
well, perhaps not, but it was quite new at the time. What I want to, my first question I really want to put to you is, clearly there was massive disruption in the market at that time, and it was a really big factor in, countless companies that were formed over that period with the disruption of the internet. Do you still look to disruption as one of the key factors for investment opportunities? And is that where young entrepreneurs, again, should keep focused on?
Absolutely. I think disruptions are happening faster now than they ever happened before. And that also means that the opportunities for young entrepreneurs are greater than ever before, because it's a combination of people finally understanding that these disruptions, especially in deep technology, can have a lasting effect, and now can have an effect really quite quickly. Because if you look at all the adoption curves of new technologies, people often plot the first 50 million radios and then TV sets, and then every time something new comes out, it goes faster. The first 50 million iPhones were probably sold overnight. I don't know. It goes faster and faster. And we've got a number of very, very basic disruptions happening right now. And I always quote four. One, of course, is to do with AI and machine learning. Two is the blockchain and smart contracts. Three is synthetic biology. And four, not surprisingly, for a physicist like me, it's quantum computing.
And when we look at the impact of all that, and it's been feeding into the market for a great amount of time, perhaps one of the more prominent sectors was the financial services market. There's most, I'm not talking about the internet, I'm talking about more sophisticated fintech technologies that have cropped up over the period. And I think our friends at Aqua Partner have quoted about 450,000 equivalents of fintech in almost every sector now. Is that going to continue? Is there an optimal point for that, or is it going to pervade into everything that we do?
Well, we're just at the beginning of it, because there are some very fundamental changes just about to happen. Mainly, I think the biggest platform that is going to appear are these stable coins that will probably be state supported. So in fact, just last month, the Bank of England produced a wonderful report on a central bank digital currencies that, basically the e-pound. And Sajid Javid, who was Chancellor, actually would have announced it at his first budget, but he didn't manage to get to his first budget.
Taken by events.
So it is imminent. The big danger, of course, is that although Britain and the Bank of England in particular are at the forefront of this, they're trying to do it together with, of course, a number of Western countries and have a consortium of banks that have an interoperable a central bank digital cash standard. And the danger is the Chinese might just do it anyway by themselves without speaking to anybody. And they of course have already had this spectacular success with Alipay and WeChat. And they might, in a very short period of time, bring out a stable coin that people use for payment and in preference to the dollar. And the other big initiative, of course, is the Libra from.
Is this sorry to interrupt. Is this primarily for smoothing consumer transactions, or does it have an impact on the exchange markets and debt financing at that sort of level for countries, or is it peculiarly consumer-oriented?
Now, this is basically for everything, because at the moment the way we pay for things is either with cash, which is down to just 28% in Britain, or with debit cards, which is actually the majority of payments that we make, or credit cards, where we all pay 2% to the robber barons. And then the very large companies just have account-to-account transfers. But if you have a digital cash that is a central bank backed, you basically unite all these payments in a system that is frictionless, costs nothing, because it's a replacement for a pound. If I give you £10, there's nobody that clips it in the process of me giving you the £10. You get exactly the £10 that I give you, and that's what digital cash does. So it's instant in the same way that £10, and it's safe. So you can also do it with very much larger amounts. So people wouldn't typically pay £1 million or so in cash. because that's not a sensible thing to do, but you can do it with a digital currency. So once you have this as a platform, then all the other financial services can sit on top of it. So there's a wonderful opportunity for new companies, new banks, new lenders, new exchanges, and new currency exchanges to work much more efficiently with much less friction.
And is this a government initiative? I mean, you spoke about our Chancellor in the UK.
Yes, it's an initiative of well, there are quite a few stablecoin initiatives. Quite a few exist already. They're private, but then they're not very stable and they're a bit shaky. Then the biggest one that got everybody, woke everybody up is Libra by Facebook, because Facebook says, well,
I remember that. Yeah.
We'll roll it out to the first 2 billion people. There is no state that has access to 2 billion people, maybe with the exception of China. So that woke people up, and then Mark Carney gave this famous talk at Jackson Hole where he talked about synthetic hegemonic currencies that really we all ought to get together, all the central banks ought to create one currency that's based on the basket of currencies, so that all these exchange rates disappear, and it's a reflection of the actual trade in the world rather than the US dollars, which is responsible for 15% of the world trade.
Of course.
60% of the world trade is settled in dollars, and this is clearly unrealistic.
I know our audience today is going to be predominantly wearing one of two hats. They're either going to be entrepreneurs or they're going to be investors. And since we did the E-Trade business together and 2000, the exit, I've been an angel investor, and my observation over the last 20 years is that the process of connecting innovation with capital doesn't seem to have changed much. And I wonder whether that's your observation. I'm just looking at perhaps too small a scale. And if it is ripe, or if there's a catalyst for change that's coming up, what might it be? Or do you still see the same ecosystem existing going forward?
Well, it is actually improving, albeit slowly. The basic fact that America has 5 times as much venture capital per capita as we do in Europe is still, a disaster for Europe, because this is a little known fact. Europe produces more startups than the US. This is a sort of an unexpected number. But the problem, so we don't have a startup problem, we have a scale-up problem. And part of the scale-up story, of course, is the availability of venture capital. Now, if there is a fifth of the venture capital in Europe compared with the United States, is no wonder we are falling behind. However, the ratio is improving, and more people see the wonderful technology base that we have in Europe, the quality of our universities and the quality of our entrepreneurs.
Yes. Yeah.
The reason why we now really have, there is enormous pressure on Europe to do better, is that it's not just America, but now also China that is putting a lot more money behind new deep technologies. So I think we need to up our game and do it fast.
I mean, part of that upping of the game, of course, is, as you say, the universities have done their part very effectively, and you've been an enormous protagonist of clever spin-outs from universities, and of course you played a part in lobbying and influencing European governments on taxation. There is a mishmash.
Yes, and the European Innovation Council. The main European initiative, which I very much hope Britain will continue to be active in, is the European Innovation Council, which is a $10 billion initiative to improve equity investments in early stage deep technology companies. And I chaired the the advisory board for that, and I'm now vice chair of that, and we hope to start it next year. And we're running a pilot already this year with over €1 billion, but next year it's going to start for.
We'll come back to the pandemic more generally, but has that been derailed? Is the wrong word, but has that been slowed down as a result of not necessarily the pandemic in its own right, but the fact that so many, if we should concentrate on Europe, so many European governments have, with the furloughing and the grants and whatever, have created one might say a positive disruption to the source of capital for companies. There's so much debt floating around at the moment that will wash through, I presume, and the initiatives you're speaking about will become the dominant influence on the finance sector.
Yes. So the thing that we've managed to do with the European Innovation Council, which in a way is modeled after the European Research Council, which arguably is the most successful European initiative ever. I mean, even very humble universities like Cambridge University will quote the number of ERC grants that they have as evidence of how good a university they are. So the ERC has been fantastic and is responsible for many of the new deep technologies that have been produced in Europe. But as I said earlier, the problem is actually not creating these deep technologies or even creating the startups. The real problem is to fund them properly and scale them up to be substantial companies that can make a difference to the European GDP. So the 10 billion that we're going to have for the European Innovation Council in equity for the first time. So it's the first time that Europe, that the EU is allowed to invest in equity of these companies. But I made sure that the equity acts just as a catalyst. So it doesn't crowd out the market, but it crowds in the market. So our hope is that the 10 billion will actually be, in reality, another 30 to 50 billion that comes from the market, because I very much hope that the majority of any investment that the EIC makes actually comes from the market. And the early pilots that we've run are very encouraging. So for every pound that we put in to these companies, we got 2.4 euro, I should say. We got 2.4 euros from the market. So this crowding in, this catalyst function, I think is a new function that the EU hasn't really used before. And I'm very optimistic about that.
We could probably do a whole interview on that and the channels that the way that it's going to be filtered in practical terms. We do have limited time, so I'm going to sort of press you on to another couple of topics. So much we spoke before, so much going into tech. What would your advice be to entrepreneurs bubbling with ideas? Is there going to be a dearth of funding, in your opinion, for non-tech? Of course, there are innovations across everything from food production, whatever, all the fundamentals. Is it a smart? Obviously, it's a smart thing to go for tech because there's still a lot of money in there. But what about non-tech?
Well, I'm a geek, so the only thing that I know about
one person to ask
is tech and deep tech at that. So I'm not so familiar with consumer companies, etc. So that's what I concentrate on. But the indirect answer that I can give is that a number of the improvements that we've brought about through technology, especially AI and machine learning, is to build platforms that make it much easier for people then to build companies on top of that address particular applications for the segment that they're experts in. So agritech, for example, is a classic one. Our understanding of genetics now and the speed with which we can characterize new plant varieties allows us to, and the phenomenal amount of information that we now have about the weather, and through satellite pictures, we can determine crop yields much more accurately. This opens up a whole
Yes,
area
that's true.
of opportunities for new companies to make their mark.
Okay. We must talk about your may have changed over the years, but there's probably some fundamentals. Your criteria for selection, and this is really of companies that you're backing, either as a private investor or through Amadeus, the venture capital company. A lot of preparation is done by entrepreneurs to get themselves ready, investment ready to go out and pitch. You know, we've all done that on both sides of the fence, poacher term gamekeeper. What do you look for, both at the stage that you are saying, do you know what, this is one to be backed, and also you referred earlier, and it's very relevant, the scaling up. Perhaps you can touch on both of those phases of an entrepreneurial journey.
Yes. Well, let's deal with the first phase, the startup, and maybe even the pre-startup. And I've got three main criteria. And like every good computer scientist, of course, I start with the 0th one, which is passion. So before we get to anywhere,
Okay.
you know, does the entrepreneur really have the passion? That was the one wonderful thing that I saw in you when you you know, joined E-Trade and built up E-Trade. You had that passion and willingness to put the shoulder to the wheel and really made it the success that it finally became. So, but then the three are size and growth rate of the market, because unless it's big, why bother? You know, we need to build substantial companies. The second one is the quality of the team. And there I have, and then the third one is defensible technology. But the reason why it's in that order is, and again, for a geek like me, this is a bit disappointing that people are more important than the technology. But I've seen so many cases where an A team with C technology beats the C team with A technology every time.
Yeah.
So people clearly are more important than the technology. But then I do also look for defensible technology, so that if people finally realize that this technology really is going to make a difference, is going to make it, so that they can't just copy it and you've lost the advantage. So it's a lasting advantage for the company. And then coming on to phase two, that then allows you to raise much larger amounts of money. So we've just managed to raise over 400 million now, I think, for GraphCore, on almost a pre-revenue company at a $2 billion valuation. That's not unusual in Silicon Valley and in America, but to pull this off in Europe is still rare. So we've managed to do it with GraphCore, but it's sadly still the exception rather than the rule. However, it's an example of where we did manage to do it in Europe. Actually, we did manage to do it in Bristol, of all places. You know, so it can be done.
Excellent. I can see that we're running out of time, and you know, I'm sure both the audience and you and I would love to go on, because there's so much more that you can contribute to a conversation on almost anything in this space. So I'm going to ask this slightly trite journalistic question of you, and say, what would be your single message to everybody, given that we've probably got watching us now several hundred venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, startup, and everybody in the ecosystem. Can it be summarized in a single message?
Yes, and it's going to be a trite one, I'm afraid. And that is, now is the best time to start a company, but it literally is. Because if you look at where the really great companies are normally founded during a period of crisis, and we certainly have that. And then they're founded when there is an increase in the amount of capital that's available. And that is the case despite COVID, because people realize we really need these new companies. So get on your bike, do it.
Well, on that very positive note, let me thank you again. It's always a joy to talk to you. And we really, really look forward to having even more of this, Hermann, when you join us at the EBAN Congress next spring. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the eBank Congress.